I'm Chancellor Emeritus James Measer. Today I'm talking with Dr. Mike Cohen, who's Associate Vice Chancellor for Global Health, the J. Herbert Bate Distinguished Professor of Medicine and Microbiology and Epidemiology. He's also the Director of the Institute for Global Health and Infectious Diseases. All of these titles are less important, though, than the fact that Mike is one of the world's leaders in the fight to stop the spread and ultimately create a vaccine for HIV/AIDS. Chancellor Holden Thorpe has said that UNC's mission is to help solve the world's greatest problems. There's perhaps no better exemplar of that level of contribution than Mike Cohen and the talented team of researchers and teachers and caregivers that he's assembled throughout the UNC Institute for Global Health and Infectious Diseases. Mike's team's study, the HIV Prevention Trials Network 052 study, has been named the 2011 Breakthrough of the Year by the journal Science. The editors at Science, the flagship publication of the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, said in their announcement that, and I quote, "In combination with other promising clinical trials, the results have galvanized efforts to end the world's AIDS epidemic in a way that would have been inconceivable even a year ago." Mike, thank you so much for being here today. Tell us how you got started in all of this business. I think, as I recall from my earlier conversations with you, I think you came here from Yale. You were a young STD researcher. I recall events that led you to China. And you've been described as a serial collaborator. Tell us how all this evolved.
I trained at Michigan and at Yale, and in Yale, I guess I'm one to seize opportunities. But when I see an opportunity, I'll often think, maybe I should do this. So my wife was a China specialist, and she had the opportunity to lead us to China for a year. That experience was pretty critical.
Was that after you were here at UNC?
Yale, at Yale.
That was still at Yale.
We came from China directly to UNC, so
Wow.
That was a pretty shocking transition. I went through the ranks of investigation,
right.
But in the very beginning of my career, the first year I was here, a new disease surfaced, HIV. And
what year was that, Mike?
1980, 81.
Okay.
First case I saw was in 80, subsequently that disease became my life's work.
Just exploded on the scene.
Right. At one point, by 1986 or so, 14% of all admissions to UNC Hospital were for HIV disease.
Wow.
So infectious disease specialists had no choice but to move towards studying the pandemic of the 20th century. And then later in that decade, in 89, I guess it was, I was approached by one of the leaders of Family Health International who said, very few people have ever worked outside the United States. You're one of them. Mm-hmm. Why don't you join us in global AIDS prevention activities?
So it was really that fateful trip to China that set up this...
Everything. They would not have approached me had I not written about China and been to China. They approached me. Again, it wasn't entirely consistent with what I knew about or what I was doing. I said, oh, okay, in a moment. And then the first country we were assigned in our partnership was the country of Malawi. Yeah. And as you know, that's become our flagship
right.
African site. And all these 22 years later, we're still working in Malawi.
Which is a fascinating story in itself, and I want to come back to Malawi. But first I want to ask you this. It seems to me that AIDS is a disease that you can't research the disease without at the same time treating the disease. So,
correct.
So the research and the clinical care really are almost totally integrated.
Right. There's an inseparable. So the research that's done is derived directly from two problems. The clinical problem,
right.
This one-time fatal, now treatable disease, and the public health aspect of the disease. It's a contagious disease. So right off the bat, you're seeing a patient in a clinic who's got a very, very bad illness. Originally we had no treatment, now we have good treatment. And that illness has tremendous stigma associated with it because it's contagious.
Right.
So all research derives directly from the patient.
Let's talk about how this is truly a global phenomenon. You've mentioned Malawi, so let's talk about Malawi. Mm-hmm. Tell the listeners about how this evolved. You mentioned it, and what it has grown to become.
So when the disease was first recognized, HIV disease,
Right.
it was recognized in a very small group of homosexual men, gay men in California. That's very unfortunate because in the end of the day, the disease really has very little to do with gay men, but the stigma
Right.
associated with the disease goes back to its very roots, and it's a pretty big tragedy that was kind of the canary in the coal mine,
Right.
because it changed the epidemic dramatically. By the late 1980s, by 1985, we knew this was a viral contagious disease. And by the late 1980s, we knew this wasn't a disease limited to the United States. In fact, we came to realize that the epicenter of the disease, for a variety of reasons, would be in sub-Saharan Africa. So then what happens then is, if you want to study the disease and make contributions, you have no choice but to go to the epicenter of the epidemic.
Why is Africa the epicenter?
It has something to do with biology in the sense that the virus that took hold there is probably more contagious than the virus we have in the United States. HIV virus is not created equally everywhere. It is because we think, at least in part, African people are more susceptible to the virus. So there are a variety of biological factors that drive HIV much faster in Africa than is possible in the United States. And we get into a pretty deep discussion of epidemiology to explain it. But one thing that we're sure about is it's not some huge difference in risk-taking behaviors. I think across these many years, we've seen people blaming the victims, that
Right.
if only African people were more socially responsible and such. We have no evidence for that. We see a combination of biological and social forces and epidemiology helping to make Africa the epicenter, and about 80% of all the cases of HIV are in sub-Saharan Africa.
But there was also a lot of political denial, especially in South Africa.
Absolutely. Well, the president of South Africa, aided by an American scientist, a renowned American scientist, became a denialist because as a politician, it was easier to be a denialist than it was to admit the magnitude and gravity of the problem. This is a tragic problem. This is not a small problem. This is it's changed dramatically in my lifetime, but at one point when we drove from the airport to the hospital in Malawi, the road was filled with coffin makers. The only occupation was coffins. Now it's furniture makers. In other words, the coffin makers are gone. With the availability of antiviral drugs, the breakthrough of the 20th century, 1996, 97, the coffin makers are furniture makers. We buy chairs now instead of coffins.
Now, tell the listeners what we're doing in Malawi, which is really quite an impressive story.
Well, we started out because we wanted to understand transmission of HIV. The work that I've been committed to and our group has been committed to is the transmission and prevention of transmission of HIV. I mean, you really have only three options, and we do all three on this campus. And let me brag.
Okay.
Let me first point out that we're certainly in the top 5 to 10 in the country, if not the world, in HIV research. Not me alone, the group. We do treatment at the cutting edge and develop treatment at the cutting edge. Both treatment of opportunistic diseases and treatment of HIV itself. We have a very large and famous Cure AIDS program, which David Margolis and Victor Garcia run. And then we have the prevention program. I've committed myself to the prevention program, but to do the prevention program, you need a kind of a combination of biology, epidemiology, and medicine. And so we started then in Africa, and we started out to understand how was the disease transmitted. All those many years ago, remember this is 1989, 1990, we did not understand how the disease was transmitted. So we had to study people and couples in whom transmission occurred and develop all kinds of tools to understand how the virus went from one person to another. That's the only way. There's no shortcuts.
So you really, the beauty of this is that you had the opportunity and took the opportunity to study a disease really from the beginning
to the end.
To where we are today.
And which we hope will be the end within my lifetime. As I've said many times, it is possible that this will go away in my lifetime. When I started in infectious disease, I remember seeing children, young people on respirators, polio ventilators, iron lungs. And in the generation that preceded me, the iron lung, the infectious disease specialists that preceded me were experts in the management of iron lungs.
Wow.
You may never have seen an iron lung.
I have actually.
You might, and so when I first trained, I went to a hospital.
But I've not seen one. But in my life.
So I learned how to manage an iron lung, which is an unthinkable thing. So the idea that HIV will go away in my lifetime seems very credible.
Will this be one of the shortest stories of an infectious disease from discovery to
If we can make it go away, if.
If?
Yeah, if. Remember, I've been working 30 years on this.
Right,
I don't know,
right.
and I and thousands of investigators have
Right.
worked for 30 years. I can't guarantee that this will go away, but I think we're making really good progress.
Are we
this
80% there, do you think?
I can't give you a percent, but I can tell you one thing. There's no virus that has ever been better studied than human immunodeficiency virus, the best studied virus ever. And we have the information available to make the disease go away, either to cure it or to prevent it. The question is, can we get the next step? You know, can we harness all the information?
So I want to go back to Malawi one more time. How many people do we have on the ground? UNC?
Hundreds now. We started out. It was a young. Again, all things start out. There's top down and bottom up.
Right.
In the end of the day, we're talking about leadership for this discussion.
That's what this is about.
I'm a bottom up guy. I would not know what to do. I see among my colleagues those who are top down people. Right? They come to you, and you as the chancellor had this experience many, many times.
Right. Great
idea. Give me $10 million and I'm going to make something happen. I wouldn't know what to do if you ever did that. Okay? I'm a bottom-up person. Okay? Build from the bottom, and so it was a young physician's assistant named Irving Hoffman, and a technician or a person with a master's degree named Frida Behetz. She and I and Irving started working on this in 1989, 1990. We've worked together the whole time. Irving ran the Durham County Health Department STD clinic, and he wanted to work internationally, and he came to see me, and the two of us and Frida, we all went to Malawi. Essentially, they went to Malawi. They're the workers. And they set up the program that allowed us to collect the specimens, which by the mid-90s had made really important contributions, if I'm allowed to brag. By the mid-90s, our group at UNC was recognized as a player in understanding transmission biology. And that was the beginning of it in Malawi. Now, subsequently, everything grew and grew and grew, not just because of me, but because of the energy and passion of the people who are given an opportunity. So bottom up, first we did infectious diseases. Then we started, and public health and care. We started training people. Then we did surgery and burn units. Then we did obstetrics and fistula repair. And so the group is very, very large. So if you looked on the ground today, you'd see a center called the Tadziwi Center, run by a full-time infectious disease specialist named Mina Hassinapur, with a medical director named Francis Martinson. You'd see an obstetrical ward run by a physician named Jeff Wilkinson. You'd see a surgery program and surgery house with many of our UNC surgeons, but especially Carol Shores and Anthony Charles. You'd be amazed. I mean, it is amazing, and you'd see just from nothing, you know, from Irving Hoffman's visit, grew all things over 20
And is
years.
this, would you say, is this the significant medical center for the whole country of Malawi?
No, I would, well, I'd love to say that, but of course I would say that this, in Lilongwe, Malawi, this center of research is involved in is most vigorously involved in the care and prevention and treatment activities in the city of Lilongwe, a city of several million people. We help to take care of almost 8,000 AIDS patients in that center. And when I went with Holden Thorpe to Malawi, the minister who we met with said that they can't have a discussion about their plans in Malawi without discussing the University of North Carolina, which I thought was, Holden loved that.
That's great.
You know, he loved that
All
quote.
right, so talk about now how you and your team, how this all came together, because we're really focusing here as leadership and strategy and how institutions get built. So this, and you keep talking about your team. Who is your team, and where are they on this campus? And how many different schools and departments are part of this global health and infectious disease?
You know, I would look at one of the great things about this university is is the combination of the geography that puts us together in a small town, the small town that really makes us get along with each other, because you know, if you start fighting with people, you know, you see them at the grocery store and you don't have an option. You know, I've been in Michigan and Yale, much bigger places. You have plenty of options, you know, to have feuds. I don't think a feud is an option in Chapel Hill. You know, it's a very small town. The beautiful geography of our campus really gives us an advantage in terms of synergy, so much smaller faculty can work together. And there's a history and a culture of collaboration, so that I've never asked a person to help that has been unwilling to help. And so the trick is to try and identify and recruit the most talented people. I think the most important thing about leadership, from my point of view, one of the most important things, of course, is searching for talent, recognizing talented people and creating environments where the talents can be fully realized and making sure those people get recognition.
So as you were recruiting people, what characteristics do you look for?
They had, excellent question, by the way. I'm looking for people who, when I'm looking at them, I see that they are going to be hardworking, creative, tenacious, ambitious, really want ambition, want recognition, want success, can take direction well, can get along at least at some level with others. There's a disconnect between how well people can work together and their creativity and ambition and passion, because by definition, they have to be driven, and that creates tensions which are in many ways desirable. So the most important thing about my leadership was searching for talented people and hiring them, and the university letting me hire them. So the team, and then a corollary of that is that no one ever leaves. Okay, I know academics breeds a culture that is kind of the Peter principle, like where your ambition curve confronts your reality curve, and you think you're so wonderful and you keep moving on and moving on. You have to create an environment where people can work together for a very long period of time. So the people that I've recruited, I started out mentioning Irving and Frida. They're still here. They're professors. Another one of my collaborators, Susan Fiskus, she's been here the entire time with me. Ron Swanstrom, the molecular virologist in our group, or the leader of molecular virology, here the entire time. Angela Kashubo, now the world's probably most famous pharmacologist in HIV, here the entire time. All of us working together pretty seamlessly for these 20 years. And in fact, as this year when I was recognized for the work that I did that's translational, I took our 15 years of lab work and decided I was going to do a gigantic study. That kind of left the basic scientist behind, because now it was time to move on to a different group. But when I talk about this, I show the picture of the people who would otherwise be unrecognized, who made the biological plausibility possible. The study would have been impossible without UNC faculty making the contributions to see the plausibility of the idea. Which drugs were we going to use? How much would we use? How long would we give them? All that goes into a clinical trial.
And it strikes me, Mike, that one of the things which you haven't said, but I infer from your description, is that you're constantly putting the spotlight on these great performers in your organization.
Yes. Oh, recognition. Why would people stay if they felt they were being exploited? If they've made the contribution, they need the spotlight at every possible moment, because that's part of leadership, is recognizing the contribution, I think, of the other people. The other part of leadership, which is very important, is what you don't do. You and I have talked before about good to great. Okay. There's nothing more important in that book than to have the courage to not do the same thing over and over again.
Okay, let's talk about that. So how do you know when to say no?
Well, when I was much younger, when you're young and you're throwing so many balls in the air, and I look back at some of the things I did, work I did, and I think, oh my goodness, that was a waste of time. But I was so enamored of what I was doing. And as I got older, I came to see focus. There's a tension between even a broken clock is right twice a day. So I let people tell me what they want to do, and I listen really carefully, and I try not to dismiss any idea. But in the end, I try and direct the people I work with, and that's a large number, not just in my own area, but in the entire group, to the things that I think are of greatest importance in terms of the world's problems and in terms of their own contributions. And so I'm pretty directive at a level that some people don't like. I mean, it's a weakness in some ways. I do not like amorphous activities. I want to know where we're starting from and where we're going. We're telling a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. If they can't tell me the beginning, the middle, and the end in the project we're discussing, I'm not interested.
But it sounds, so you have metrics as well.
Absolutely.
You measure.
I look at how important is the problem, how realistic is the approach to the problem. Do they have the skills? Will we be at the cutting edge? And so certainly that's always been our attitude about HIV transmission prevention research. And ironically, as you point out, we've been recognized for that.
Right.
Or maybe not ironically.
I should point out, by the way, that you never came to me and said we should have an institute for global health and infectious disease. That I actually asked you.
You came to me, right?
I went to you, but I went to you because of what you had put together.
No, I understand. I think your vision. I never. Right, your vision.
I was only smart to recognize what you'd already accomplished.
You and Bob, my good friend Bob Gold, one of my best friends, and you decided we should have such an organization. And I think that, but in reality, I'll tell you, that organization, the Institute, What it actually does is just personify what already existed.
Exactly.
In other words, we already had an Institute for Global Health and Infectious Disease, but by creating
we just
named it, and you let us have a conference on Fridays.
That's
okay,
right.
So the conference on Fridays has become a really big deal. That conference has hundreds of people now because it's the Institute's weekly conference that people attend. It brings everybody together. So I think thank you for your creation.
No, it's not. It's thank you for allowing me to put a name on something that was really. My thought was that we needed to recognize what was here, but it really is a.
It's interesting though about the one thing that there is something that came out of that. Of course, it is true. It created even more synergy, help with synergy, because the institution recognize the synergy. But some of the resources that were made available allowed us to recruit other people in other schools who've been terrifically successful. Again, the talent search. So we had a small amount of money, and you know, it doesn't take a lot. Affection, respect, and a very small amount of money can galvanize recruitment. And so we recruited several faculty in other schools, public health, medical school, public policy, and academic affairs that have been terrifically successful. Great faculty members. And so this idea to kind of constantly put pressure on the university to be a global university, that's really my job, is to never be satisfied, that we've got to look beyond our own borders. And I think that's been a contribution of that institute.
So what would you say to people like yourself who are in this place, who have all of this, obviously you took advantage of the fact that we not only have a great medical school, we have a great school of public health, we have great basic science, and you've built a team which is clearly crosses all kinds of departmental and school lines, and people don't, as you pointed out, don't pay very much attention to,
departments,
to those departments.
Correct. Which is, by the way, in my mind, I really don't care about departments, for the most part. I'm not sure the department chairs appreciate my attitude, because many times the faculty who are kind of viewed as part of my group, they would, gravitate to me to help them, so it does create a certain healthy tension between the needs of a department and the needs of an institute and the research organization. So,
well, what advice would you give to people like you who have similar ideas, who want to create these, about how to go about building an institution like, as you have done?
You have to, first of all, you got to decide, am I a top-down guy or a bottom-up guy? You as chancellor dealt with both kinds of people. I believe that we rarely saw each other because I wasn't in your office asking for things all the time. But I know, conversely, there's a lot of top-down people who think they can't accomplish anything unless they first have the resources, right? I would try and inspire people to be bottom-up.
But yours was clearly built bottoms-up.
But I would inspire people to think that way.
Okay.
Because I think that you eventually get your top-down stuff out of your bottom-up contributions.
Right.
Once you've demonstrated to people sweat equity, good ideas, other people buying into what your idea is, it's much easier for a university administrator to say, this is an area we have to go, than just an out of the clear blue sky idea. I think that's quite important.
Right.
And I would inspire people to have kind of to understand our culture. That is, if they come to this campus, they should understand it is a culture where people will contribute to them if they have a good idea. And the third thing is the thing that I learned as I was older. Focus is important, and understand the beginning, the middle, and the end. Be able to tell the whole story, where you're starting, where you want to go in the middle, and where it's all going to end, and how it's going to be sustainable and important. I think that's what they do in movie pitches. They pitch a movie. You've got to be able to explain that. And most of my work here has been selling science, not doing science, selling science.
But you've also, but it seems to me you have kept, you've always been very clear about what you're about. It's an infectious disease. It's on a global scale.
Correct.
And you've never lost that focus.
And I've always known I was going to work to prevent HIV. And each component that came into play, I stayed with the same theme. I didn't deviate much from that theme. There are sub-themes that, many, many sub-themes, but the big picture was always in my mind from 1980 all the way to 2011. I mean, nothing really changed. And in fact, as an aside, I almost always stole from one field into another field. In other words, before we knew that HIV was causing, the virus was causing the disease, I was working on another disease called gonorrhea. Mm-hmm. But I was working to understand the transmission of gonorrhea from one person to another. And so I was measuring the exact same things I measured in HIV, I had already measured in gonorrhea. The gonorrhea tools existed. The HIV tools didn't exist. The scientists at UNC were required to contribute to make the tools. So once we saw what we needed to learn, we'd say, look, how do we measure the number of HIV particles in a genital secretion? We had developed those tools for gonorrhea. We didn't have those tools for HIV. Then we'd say, well, how do we reduce the number of particles? We had done that with gonorrhea. We'd shown how quickly we could reduce the number of particles of gonorrhea in the 1980s. In the 1990s, the team was able to show how they could reduce the number of particles of HIV. So I stole from one field to another field. In academics, you do the same thing over and over and over again. You just try and do it better and better and better for a more and more and more important problem.
This year, Science Magazine recognized your work as the Discovery of the Year for 2011. There's got to be a story behind this. So two things. What's the significance of this award, and tell us the story.
Okay. It's not an award, it's recognition. And the recognition is important, I think, because science, of course, looks across all science. And the editors decided that this particular piece of work, which is really 20 years of work, not a day of work, that piece of work was the best they could identify, the most important that they could identify. It's been the first time in 18 years, 17 or 18 years, that HIV has been on the cover for the Breakthrough of the Year. Certainly the first time the University of North Carolina, an investigator here, had that recognition. It's great for the university, and it's great for the group that did the work. This work, of course, was supported by the NIH, 6 pharmaceutical companies, 13 sites in 9 countries, thousands of investigators, and 4,000 participants, 2,000 couples. This is a big study. So the real question is, how does a guy working in a lab with specimens from Malawi do this study?
And this is 20 years of work.
20 years of work.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really great question. How is this even possible? So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a long story. So I told you we put together a group and we worked in a lab and we were trying to understand the transmission and prevention of transmission of HIV. And after about 10 years, and we also worked in cats with NC State. That's another part of our group, essentially.
I didn't know
and after about 10 years, we decided, you know, if we offer antiviral therapy to people early in their disease, we can suppress the growth of the virus to the extent that will render them not contagious to the next person. And most people believe this. It was intuitive. You know, why shouldn't it be that way? We had shown that to be the case in gonorrhea. We had shown it in other infectious diseases. Of course, it was intuitive. But I said, you know, we need to prove this because we didn't know the magnitude or the durability. So I set out in 1999 to try and design a clinical trial to prove it. And I really just met nothing but a wall. Okay, there was no interest in supporting it for a variety of reasons. And I drew a slide, I remember at that time, of me pushing a boulder up a hill. I used that slide for years and years. And I said, you know, we're going to do this. And in 2000, there was a meeting in Durban, the first giant AIDS meeting in Africa, and people came to really see the disease for the first time. And the drugs were more readily available by then. And I convinced the NIH to let me, to support writing a description of the trial, which in and of itself was a huge effort because of the ethics involved, of recruiting one person who's positive and one person who's negative and studying them in a setting where you can understand if the drugs are stopping transmission. So by 2002, we had designed, it took us almost 2 years to design the trial and work through the ethics issues. Just the ethics issues alone were huge. And by 2002, we had recruited 7 sites or 8 sites. And when we thought we were moving along, and the NIH said, you know, this might be possible, but guess what? In order for you to do the study, you have to get all the drugs yourself, and they have to be free, and they have to come from American investigators. So this was like a Greek tragedy, where I was like sent on a search worldwide for drug companies that had the drugs I needed. It can't be just any drug. Remember, our lab work suggested we needed special drugs. So I, over about 2.5 years, with the help of many people, got 6 companies to donate $30 million worth of drugs. So I went back to the NIH and said, I've got the drugs, which was, I think, a shock to them. And so they said, okay, you can do a pilot. Okay, everything was a step. They said, you can do a pilot. I said, what do you mean a pilot? I said, enroll 100 couples and prove to us that you can enroll 100 couples. So we enrolled 100 couples in 2005. And the 100 couples did great. Everything was perfect. But the NIH decided to reorganize. And so the 100 couples, instead of just being rolled into a giant study, were on hold for 2 years. So then it was 2007. And then in a kind of a mystical moment, one of the new directors of the NIH said, you know, we're going to let you go forward with the study. You can enroll the study. And that was the beginning, 2007. The study started enrolling 2007. At the last day of full enrollment, 2010, we were to continue for 5 more years. So we enrolled from 2007 to 2010. There were many obstacles and barriers and events, and in 2010 we were fully enrolled and very happy, but no one really paid much attention to the study. And I had fully moved away from my laboratory and the lab work I was doing to running this study. In other words, this transition from being a scientist to a clinical investigator was difficult, in truth. But either I was going to tell the story or I wasn't going to tell the story. I was there at the beginning of the story. I was there at the middle of the story. Did I have the energy to go to the end of the story? Not me and all the thousands of people working on this. And then the leadership skill issue comes up again. The constant optimism on calls with people all over the world all the time. I had two wonderful people who worked with me the whole time, 14 years together, with one woman in Washington, one woman in Chapel Hill, working full time on this with me. So we got it fully enrolled, and things were going great from our point of view. And then on April 28th of 2011, the Oversight Board asked, we met with them every 6 months. This was our 11th meeting, because the study had gone on so long, we knew them well, they knew us well. At that meeting, we went and they meet and they discuss the results. It's blinded to me. I have no idea what's happening. And at that meeting, we went in the room and they said, you know, we have a recommendation about your study, which they had in the past. The recommendation is, you know, dot more I's, cross more T's, whatever. They said, we have a recommendation. And I said, fine, what's the recommendation? They said, we can't tell you. And no one would make eye contact. And no one would make eye contact. So I said, okay. And the two women who work with me were there, plus many other people from the NIH. And said, okay. They said, the NIH will have to tell you what the recommendation is. And I said, okay. We thought the study had failed. And so we headed for the airport. The one woman who's closest with me was crying hysterically. And like I said, look, we did our very best on the study. You know, I know you spent your entire adult life working on the study. She's in her late 30s. But we did our best, and we'll see what they recommend. And by the time we got close to the airport, they called and said, could you come back to the NIH? And so we drove back to the NIH, and by then they were assembled in a room, and they had made copies of the results, which is 500 pages of results of the study. And they said, congratulations, this is probably the best result. You know, they said, this is a home run. You hit the ball out of the park. Your study is like fantastic. And so then we were able to see that we had prevented HIV transmission. Now, that's the fulfilling of a hypothesis that we were working on from 1990. Remember, the trip to Malawi was the hypothesis. So it's 21 years later that hypothesis was realized. Now, what I didn't understand at all was that then we were going to have the recommendation was not to stop the study. It was to make the results public. What the Oversight Board thought were the results were so important worldwide that they should be made public.
Even early in this
then, just tell people the result. Interim results, let's call it that. So we had many meetings, emergent meetings, about what to do, the ethics of it, how to do it, and really big drama. I won't bore you with all the drama, but many, many pieces of drama. On May 11th, we had a press conference at the NIH, and even then, I did not understand the magnitude of this, because I told Nancy Davis, our public relations person here, we might get some publicity for work I've been doing. Okay, I mean, I had no conception. And then that day, I came to see how important the number was, 96%, that we had 96% prevention, and how the world was waiting for this number in a way that I didn't even understand. Even having committed my entire life to one piece of work, I did not understand the importance of the number. And subsequently, since May 11th, I've really done nothing but go to policy meetings and talk about this and work on the study, and then the science recognition has created a whole nother sea wave of interest in this kind of work and what it means for the future.
So this is an incredible story you've just told, and to me, I'm struck by several things. One, the tenacious way that you were just dogged in your pursuit of this passionate belief, and you obviously had to, and you won the trust of the NIH. You also had to trust your own people, and it's a great story and also you were persistently optimistic that you were onto something, and so it was this unwillingness to accept defeat and to persevere. I mean, it's all the things we look for in leaders.
One thing, all that's true, but one thing, remember, it would be great if you were trying, there's another feature of this that's important. that I didn't understand myself until now, really. If I was trying to cure cancer, okay, people would say, if you do that, that's great. But as I was trying to generate the number, 96% or 50%, people were not interested until I got the number. In other words, they'd say, well, why bother? Everybody knows this is going to work. So remember, there was a whole other layer of this. The tenacity required tolerating dismissal about the relative importance of the idea. And when science recognized this, I must have gotten 100 emails from people who told me I was wasting my time.
Yeah.
And more than 100 emails.
Yeah.
And like, I guess I was wrong, that was almost always.
So what is this, I want to come back now to the question that people in South Building or leaders anywhere face and specifically for UNC-Chapel Hill. How do we know what the next big idea is? How do we
succeed? How do you succeed?
And how do we choose which horses to bet on?
Right.
Obviously, a lot of people made the right decision in this case to support what you were doing. There were 10 or 15 or 100 other things they could have supported instead.
Sure. Well, right. I think for the South Building, and for the administration of this university or any other, this is a very tough business. We've talked about that. Very difficult, because if you have a new Apple store, if you were the manager of the Apple store in our town, you'd measure the sales, and you'd look at the performance of each of your sales associates, and in 6 months, you'd know whether the Apple store was a success. How do you know when the University of North Carolina is a success? What's the metric that you actually believe in? So the very first thing for the administrator is to sit down and decide, what metric am I going to believe and not going to believe? That's really critical, because, again, the smoke and mirrors. The metrics that don't support the person who is visiting you that day, those metrics they'll dismiss. So I think an administrator has to decide in their own internal mind what they believe. And then I think beyond that, it's a talent hunt. They have to have faith in talent. Number two, they have to know what's going on the campus and decide what they're going to focus on. You can't do everything. It's impossible. For the global health arena or for globalization, we've decided on Asia, Africa, Central America. We can't work in every country. Every day another delegation visits us. There's no country in the world that doesn't want us to build a medical school there or a public health school.
So that's obviously a critical decision.
The focus.
We need to focus, and I think we have focused. And you've helped us do that.
Well, I'm focusing on my own area, but again, as chancellor, you weren't dealing with me every day. You were dealing with the entire university, and poor President Ross is dealing with 16 campuses. So to make these bets is really critical.
It is.
And I think that the most successful administrator is the administrator who, number one, understands the metrics he believes and is not going to be dissuaded by a squeaky wheel. And the difficulty is when the squeaky wheel surfaces, the chairperson who's supporting the squeaky wheel, even if that person you think isn't so talented, is going to be the champion of that person. The courage this is again the good to great idea. What are you not going to support? Who are you going to say goodbye to? Very, very difficult, because you can't do everything.
That's right.
You can't work in every country, and you can't retain every faculty member.
That's right.
So you have to have an idea, and you have to be a talent scout. The most successful chancellor or leader is the one who's a great talent scout, can see great talent, can support them with recognition, the money they need at a certain level, the infrastructure they need, can focus, can understand what the things we do that are good and not good. Again, we can't be good at everything. It's impossible.
That's right.
We have a gigantic, wonderful university 6 miles away. We can't compete with them on everything.
That's right.
We have to be great at what we're great at, and not try and be great at everything they're great at. So to me, the leadership is the same. It's the same as at my level, okay? But at my level, is much easier, as I've said many times. My level, I can see the success and feel it, and know who's doing well and who's not doing well. But actually,
the lesson you're making applies not only to the chancellors, but to department chairs. At whatever level of leadership one finds these same questions emerge.
I would think that that's true.
Knowing when to say no, when to say yes, which horse to bet on, and which to let go out of the stable.
Be dispassionate. You can be kind. And also, usually with the horse, we'll try and get the horse to run down the right track. In other words, I never dismiss. I don't just say goodbye. I try and as a leader, I try and be supportive and make round circles and round, I always talk about the round circles and round holes. Try and find the skill and put them into a place where they can be competitive and successful. Because I think that's our future. Now, do I think the university will succeed? Absolutely. You know, we've spoken about this before. Just like we have a great basketball team, we're always going to have a great university. For 1,000 reasons, we're always going to be successful.
Right.
So when we worry about the budget and the NIH budget and this and that, I lose almost no sleep over it. You can lose sleep over it.
I don't either. I remain optimistic.
I believe we will never fail. I mean, we have moment-to-moment failures where we don't get grants and we're not, this doesn't work and that doesn't work, but we've been here several hundred years. We'll be here several hundred more years.
The trajectory is positive.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that.
I agree. Thanks so much, Mike, for being on this conversation today.
Thanks.